Now, the last time you guys saw this system, it was a little bit dirty and it was a little bit slow, and I actually paid not a lot of money for it. It was a pretty cheap system and it did game. You could actually get it running. Everything worked perfectly fine. But since then, I've given it a bit of a tear down, started to give it a bit of cleanup, and today I thought we would give it a bit of an upgrade as well, just to see if we could bring it back to life again. So as a bit of a recap for those of you that haven't watched the previous video, this was a very budget system that I purchased. It was around £35, which is a pretty good bargain for any gaming PC nowadays, but it was a little bit slow and there was a lot of dust and things in it. Playing older games, it was perfectly fine. You could get pretty much your maximum FPSs on that, but if we tried something new like Cyberpunk 2077, in some instances in 1080p, we were only receiving around 5 frames per second, which of course is completely unplayable. So I thought I'd do some work on it, and I started by actually giving it a bit of a clean down. Now, since the last time you saw it, I have actually torn the system down and I've given it a good clean up. Inside of here now is absolutely sparkling. There's no issues, there's no dust, there's no little stickers on it. I've cleaned all of that stuff off now, and the case itself is actually quite fantastic. I have reinstalled some of the parts that we took out and cleaned. The one being the power supply, we're going to keep that around. It was a Corsair VS450 power supply. Not the greatest power supply out there, but it's enough for what we want to do with the system, and it works perfectly fine. We also moved the rear fan here, the case fan, the 120mm, to the front, and I actually really liked this system originally because it was a completely Corsair system. We've got a Corsair power supply, Corsair case, we've got Corsair fans, so somebody actually paid a pretty penny for this back in the day, even though I managed to get it for such a bargain. The front fan has been moved purely because there was no actual intake fans on this system, so that's going to provide some form of intake in, and for exhaust we've got a different plan for it. Generally though, the system is pretty clean now. It's going to get lots of airflow and it's going to take our parts perfectly fine. The rest of this system though is going to have a little bit of a change to it. We do have all the parts out here, and we're going to start with the motherboard itself. Now, the motherboard is a very basic H110 from Gigabyte. It's got absolutely no features at all. There's no NVMe drives on this board. You can't do any kind of overclocking on this board, so it's not the best thing out there, but it's going to work for our use case. There is some changes we do need to make to this though. The first one is we're going to be changing this RAM out. Now, the RAM that they included on this was a Corsair stick of RAM, but it is the value select stuff, and it's only 8GB in single channel. Of course, we're going to be replacing that, and we're going to give it at least dual channel memory. I did try to actually source another stick just like this, but it actually was going to cost quite a bit. They don't seem to make it anymore, and if you go on eBay, they'll cost you about £20–25. That's what people want for them, so I'm not willing to do that. Instead, I decided to go for something a bit newer, and I've decided to pick up some of this. Now, this is Corsair's Vengeance LPX RAM. It is low profile, it does come with heat sinks, and I only paid £30 for this. That is actually a pretty good price for DDR4. 2 sticks of 8GB, bringing a total of 16GB. Now, this is 3200 MHz RAM, but I don't believe that this CPU will even run at that. I think it runs at around 2400, something like that, but we'll see when we get the system on. Of course, the motherboard being so basic, we're not exactly going to get any kind of super overclocking on it anyway, but I think it'll run perfectly fine, and for the price, you can't really complain about it. So that is one upgrade that we're going to be making to this motherboard. The second upgrade is not the CPU itself. We're going to be leaving the i5-6500 in here, and the reason for that is because we just really want to give this system a bit of a chance, at least with some of the original parts. And during our previous testing, we realized that the 6500 wasn't actually our bottleneck, it was the graphics card. So if we at least upgrade other things, maybe we can give this CPU a chance to get to its full potential. But we are going to be replacing the cooler. Now, the original cooler on this was a stock Intel cooler, and it worked perfectly fine. It kept things reasonably cool, but it is really loud. This one has a problem with it. I think something like the bearings have worn out or something, because when it actually gets up to speed, it has a really loud ticking on it, so it's going tick 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 as it goes around. And of course, the warmer the system gets, the faster the fan runs, and the faster or the louder that noise becomes. It gets really loud and it's really annoying, so we're going to be replacing that. Now, I did originally want to continue on the Corsair theme with this build, but looking at the prices of brand new 240mm Corsair all-in-one coolers, which is something that I like to use, it just wasn't financially viable for this system. You're looking around £100 to £150 for one of them, and I wasn't willing to actually spend that kind of money. But we're going to get rid of that, and Instead, we're going to go with something that's a little more cost effective. I did at one point think that maybe we should fit an air cooler, but then it would have ruined the Corsair branding, particularly because I couldn't really find a Corsair air cooler. So instead I jumped on eBay and I took a look at what they had to offer, and I managed to pick up one of these. Now this is of course a Corsair 240mm all-in-one cooler, but I actually managed to snag this on eBay for about £20. That actually makes it about the same price as a reasonably cheap air cooler. And to be honest, everything works perfectly fine on it. There are a few little bits missing on this. And for those of you that want to know the model, it is the Corsair Hydro H110 IV2, or at least that's what it was advertised as. It's a very nice looking cooler, but like I say, it was missing a few parts. Nothing that was actually majorly important. There is a USB cable apparently that goes to this block, which allows you to change the colors of it. We're not going to be able to see the colors, so it doesn't really matter that that is missing. And then of course the screws for mounting the radiator to the case itself were also missing, but we can resolve that by actually flipping it around, mounting the fans first, and then we'll go through the fans and into the actual radiator itself. We will need to turn these fans around because we want them to draw the air out, and that's actually going to provide our exhaust as well. So that is what we're going to replace the cooling solution with, and hopefully it's going to give us some pretty decent cooling. Now the last thing that we are going to be replacing in this is of course that graphics card. The graphics card that we had in here was the AMD Radeon R9 270X, and we knew that clearly because it just says it on the back of the card there. It is a Red Devil card and it looks really nice. I was really impressed with how this card looked and how it performed, particularly for its age, but it's time to let it go now. We will probably do a video on this on its own at some point. We'll give it a clean down, we'll give it a repasting, we'll see what it can actually do if we were to put it against some more modernish games at some point. You won't want to miss that, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. But apart from that, this thing is going to be going, and we're going to be replacing it with something even cooler. Now, I have managed to actually pick up something that should pair very well with this CPU in the form of this. Now, this is the Nvidia Geforce GTX 1070 Ti. It is a Founders Edition card, which I absolutely love. I love the look of the Founder Edition cards from this era. It looks very similar to the 1080 Ti that we've got, except it does have a single 8-pin connection instead of the twin connections. And quite weirdly, this one does light up as well. The actual logo on the side here actually lights up in green. I don't believe my 1080 Ti does that, but I might be misremembering there, to be honest. But apart from that, I think this is going to go great with the system. It's also going to look really awesome in the case, and hopefully it will allow us to just get the full potential of that CPU. Now, I have never used a 1070 Ti before, so I don't really know what the performance is like, but I do know it is much faster than the R9 270X. It's many generations up from that, particularly when it comes to performance and of course looks as well. So hopefully we've got a good pair in there. But overall, now all we need to do is just pop the system back together again, and then we'll give it a bit of a test and we'll see, you know, what kind of performance we get. We'll test against Cyberpunk 2077 again, see if we can get a bit better off of our benchmark than previously. I don't think it would take much considering the performance we got. And then maybe we'll check out a few other games and see if this system really has what it takes now in 2024 to at least get some games started and give us a reasonably decent 1080p experience. So the system's together now, and it was reasonably easy to put together. It is a little bit of a shame on this case because from perspective, it looks like a huge case. And it is when it's empty, but once you start putting parts in it, you can kind of see where Corsair went wrong on a few things. The motherboard is so close to the top of the case that it was really difficult to fit the all-in-one cooler in. It's a good job that we went for low profile RAM because otherwise it just simply wouldn't fit in. It would be hitting it. It's very, very close now, just enough to be able to slide a cable between it. So that was actually useful when we were coming to do the cable management. But then because everything is so high to the top and the all-in-one cooler is in the way, trying to get the cables into places like the power for the EPS was a little bit awkward. I had to actually shunt the radiator all the way across to be able to do that. And of course the CPU header for the fan, that was also hidden by the radiator too. So that's a little bit of a shame because it means that this case is deceptively large, but until you start installing things, it's a little bit awkward. But overall, the system is actually looking pretty great now. We didn't even spend that much on upgrades for this. For the cooler, it was £20. For the additional RAM, it was £30, and that was brand new. And then for the 1070 Ti, I actually managed to pick that up for about £80. That's not bad for a 1070 Ti. Usually the 1070s at the moment go for that kind of price, but I kind of stumbled lucky and managed to pick that one up, particularly a Founders Edition in a box. That was pretty lucky for me. But the card looks absolutely great in the system. It does have the nice little light up logo there, although you're not going to be able to see it because the side of the case isn't glass. It's a solid side, but that also will help us in hiding the fact that the all-in-one cooler is upside down. Corsair actually put a logo on the side, and when you fit it a certain way, it's upside down, so it looks a little bit silly, but like I say, with the side panel, you're not going to be able to tell. We've got a quick little Heaven benchmark running here, and everything seems to be getting up to temperatures nicely. It seems to be running nice and sweet, and it's much quieter than it was before. That Intel stock cooler was really causing us some issues with noise, but now with the twin 120mm fans and a pump that's reasonably quiet, it's actually quietened everything quite fair down. The one thing that is making a little bit of noise at the moment due to the benchmark running is the graphics card. It is a blower style card and they're not well known for being quiet, but it's not too bad. It sounds very similar to just a normal card with twin fans on it at the moment. I'm hoping it doesn't get too loud once we get the game actually up to temperature, but we'll see as we go along. Now, if you remember from the last time that we tested this system, playing old games like Half-Life 2 is absolutely breezy on this, and things like Rise of the Tomb Raider, that worked perfectly fine. It kind of gave you a 60 FPS experience, and that was enough to be able to play that game. I'm pretty sure we actually put it down to a medium setting as well to do that, but it was playable. The one game that wasn't playable at all was Cyberpunk 2077. In 1080p with any kind of setting, you were looking at around 10 frames per second with, I think it was just about scratching 3 frames per second on the 1% lows, which made it completely unplayable. Even when we dropped the resolution to 720p, it didn't really help much out. We did manage to squeeze up to 30 FPS on that one on average, but again, the 1% lows were down at about 3 FPS, which again means it's completely unplayable. So the first game that we're going to test with this system now, with its upgrades, is of course Cyberpunk 2077. Let's see if we've improved our experience. Now, while the game is loading up, it is worth just mentioning that when this system comes under load, it still has a little bit of coil whine, which means it must be that power supply. It's not the greatest power supply in the world. In actual fact, a few people laughed at it in the last video. It is the Corsair VS450, a very budget power supply back in when it was created, and today not many people really would be using them, but it works okay in the system. It is producing enough power to power everything perfectly fine. It's just a little bit noisy now and again, but let's jump into game and see what kind of performance we're getting right now. As we can see from the stats in the corner, we're already getting a pretty decent performance here of around 61 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 37. Not 100% sure what the settings are at the moment, but we'll head over to them just to check it out. If we go to our video settings, we are running in 1080p. We've got our VSync disabled at the moment, and we're set to a custom preset. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set that down to high, disable any kind of FSR, and we'll go back into the game and see if we can get a reasonably playable experience here. Now, back in game, we're getting an average of 56 frames per second with a 1% low of 37, 35. This is actually a much better experience than we were getting before, particularly with that old graphics card that can barely get about 3 FPS on the 1% lows. This is starting to become much more playable now, although the 1070 Ti is struggling a little bit. In actual fact, if you look at the stats in the corner, it's not the 1070 Ti that's struggling really, it's that CPU. So we've kind of caused ourselves another issue here with a bit of a bottleneck on the CPU, but everything seems to be running okay at the moment. 1080p is probably roughly where you want to be playing this with a system just like this, but we'll head over to the settings and we'll see if we can actually tweak anything just to kind of make things a little bit better. One thing I will do is I will enable FSR, because of course you have access to that even with a GTX card. We're going to set it to a balance setting at the moment, see if we can push it over that 60 FPS and just improve those 1% lows just slightly. Go back into the game. So we are now getting an average of about 53, 51 frames per second. It's lowered the utilization of the CPU just a little bit, but apart from that, everything is reasonably looking okay. I don't think there's any major problems here. It's a little bit stuttery when there's lots of people on the screen, so clearly that CPU, again, it's gone up to 100% now. There's a lot of people around, so instead of FSR, what we'll do is we'll jump back into the settings. We're going to disable that FSR for now. We're actually going to change the custom settings. We're going to put that down to a medium setting, which is of course going to reduce the crowd density to low and some other settings too. We will disable FSR again, and we'll go back into game with a medium preset. Now that we're back in game, things are improving just ever so slightly. There's not that much of a difference here, but those 1% lows are increasing a little bit. We are currently getting an average of 53 frames per second with a 1% low of 36. That will give you a pretty decent console-like experience, although the graphical fidelity is much, much better than definitely what you got on the PS4 or Xbox One back in the day. So it's kind of clear to see that this upgrade has actually given this little system a new life. It's brought it back to life again. We can play modern games, and to be honest, there's a lot of other things that this system can play. So let's take a look at some of them. As you can see from those games, this system is now pretty much capable of playing pretty much any modern game, although it does take a little bit of crutching here and there. For some of those real demanding games like The Last of Us and things like that, you will need to enable things like FSR3 with frame gen, or not necessarily frame gen, but FSR3 at least. Frame generation may actually allow this card to get a little bit more out of it, particularly because it does have the 8 gigabytes of VRAM, so it's going to be okay if you use something like that. But overall, it's an okay system. It's pretty much a mid of the ground kind of system that will play modern games, definitely play older games, perfect for things like esports titles. This system's got way more power than it needs to be able to play them. But the one big letdown is of course the CPU now, and this is what it takes when it comes to PC gaming and PC building. You upgrade one part and then you have to upgrade another, unless you upgrade everything, which is what some people do. They do wait for a certain period of time and then they'll upgrade the whole system. For those of us that like to actually upgrade little bits as we go along, we're always going to cause issues like this. So the next thing that this system ideally would need is a CPU. You could pick up something like the i7 6700. You can get them pretty cheap nowadays, around £30–40, but of course that keeps adding to the cost of the machine. By the time we've finished, this system would probably cost around £200–250 if we upgraded to an i7. We'd probably want to add a few more fans in here to make sure that we keep those temperatures down. A nice 3 at the front and another one back on the back there. But I think the motherboard itself as well, with a BIOS update, would support the 7th generation. That would be a good idea to do, because you could then go to something like the i7 7700. Cost you a little bit more again than the 6700, but you would be maxing out pretty much the platform really. But overall, this is a pretty decent upgrade to a system. We've managed to keep everything Corsair. Again, extra Corsair all-in-one cooler, extra Corsair RAM, so it turned out to be pretty good. I don't know what I'm going to be doing with this machine next. Probably this is as far as we're going to take it. We've kind of shown you guys that you can upgrade an older system like this to really kind of perform a lot better. I will definitely be doing a video on the 1070 Ti on its own. We'll put it in our benching rig, see what that card really does have in 2024. You won't want to miss that, so make sure you subscribe. But aside from that, let me know in the comments below what you think of the system so far. Is there anything you would do to it next, or would you pretty much say that's quits now and it's time to upgrade your system if you want to go any further? I do really like doing these kind of upgrades because I think they're pretty cool to just kind of see what old hardware really has to it and what you would need to do to get it to game. We've got lots more videos coming along like this, but until the next video, I'll catch you guys in the next one.